Hello everyone, my name is and I am the curator of contemporary art here at the Cree. So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is an amazing opportunity to hear directly from the artists about their work and to go around with them and really get some first-hand information. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we are on the traditional and unceded territories of the Ligwiłda'xw people of the Weewakai, and Nuu-chah First Nations. And I'm going to read bios of the artists, and then I'm just going to let them fly. So it's going to be a fun and informal thing. They're going to take you around. Please feel welcome to ask questions and to talk and just bathe in their majesty in general.
Cool. Put that in my bio.
So, Sonny Assu, this lovely gentleman over here, is Ligwiw'ta of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nations. He was raised in North Delta, BC, over 250 kilometers from his ancestral home on Vancouver Island. Having been raised as your everyday average suburbanite, it wasn't until he was 8 years old that he discovered his Ligwiw'ta Kwakwaka'wakw heritage. Later in life, this discovery would be the conceptual focal point that helped launch his unique art practice. Assu's artistic practice is diverse, spanning painting, sculpture, photography, digital art, and printmaking. Sonny negotiates Western and Kwakwaka'wakw principles of art making as a means of exploring his family history and the experiences of being an Indigenous person in the colonial state we call Canada. Having cut his teeth in Vancouver's art scene, Assu packed up and moved to Montreal to be with the love of his life. Aw, she's the director here. 5 years later, along with his wife and beautiful daughter, Sonny moved back to BC, eventually settling back home on unceded Ligwiw'ta territory in Campbell River. Assu received his BFA from Emily Carr University in 2002 and was the recipient of their Distinguished Alumni Award in 2006. He received the BC Creative Achievement Award for First Nations Art in 2011 and was thrice longlisted for the Sobey Art Award. He received his MFA from Concordia University in 2017 and was one of the laureates for the 2017 Reveal Indigenous Art Awards. His work has been accepted into the National Gallery of Canada, Seattle Art Museum, Vancouver Art Gallery, Museum of Anthropology at UBC, Burke Museum at the University of Washington, Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, Hydro-Quebec, Lotto-Quebec, and in various other public and private collections across Canada, the United States, and the UK. So bathe in his glory. Tlekik? Yelmer Wentz Dog was raised on Salteaux Island in Barclay Sound in Huayet First Nations territory off the west coast of Vancouver Island. It was there that his understanding and desire of pursuing both his traditional Nuu-chah-nulth and contemporary art practices began. Hjalmer Wenstob, this lovely gentleman over here, is an interdisciplinary artist who specializes in sculpture and carving. He is Nuu-chah-nulth from Tla'aqueche First Nations on his father's side and Norwegian and English on his mother's side. Yelmer speaks of 3 dialects in his work: contemporary, traditional, and community-based. His traditional dialect centers around the creation of traditional masks and ceremonial objects to be used by his community and Indigenous peoples. This body of work is the least well-known publicly, yet is the most important in grounding his understanding of Nuu-chah-nulth culture and art. His community-based art practice began while he was a provincial and national youth representative with the Assembly of First Nations from 2012 to 2016, where he held carving events across the country with youth and communities, bringing people together through collaborative, hands-on carving and art. These community carving projects continue today. Through these projects, he has carved totem poles, log drums, and large-scale sculptures with youth and communities, which are installed throughout Canada. Through his contemporary dialect, Yelmer completed both an undergraduate and master's degree at the University of Victoria. exploring the relationship between cultures and art and the balance between traditional and contemporary. His work, at times highly political, uses humor and irony to pose difficult questions of respect, reconciliation, and environmental issues. Recently, Yelmer and his family opened Cedar House Gallery in Ligwiłda'xw, where Yelmer is exploring ways of weaving his contemporary political work with more traditional materials and styles. In 2018, he was awarded the National William and Meredith Saunderson Prize for Emerging Artists in Canada from the Nation Foundation in Ottawa, Ontario. So please join me in welcoming these lovely artists. Start where you like.
Yes, in the territory, go first.
Oh no! Let me tell you about Sonny's work. Somebody tried to open this cereal box at one point in time. And it wasn't me.
Well, thanks for coming out to hear us talk about our work. I'm really excited to be here today to show here at the Campbell Art Gallery in my hometown. It's really wonderful to be able to bring my work here, to be viewed here, to show my community what I do, and just also to thank them for the support that they've given me throughout my career. So I feel it's really important to be able to bring your stuff home and to show it. I'm really honored to be showing with Hjalmer and with Laurie Mondo, who unfortunately couldn't come out. This is the second or third time I've shown with Laurie. She's pretty amazing. She's an amazing artist. Really honored to be here with Yelmer. I think to be able to see our works together is really interesting because there's a lot of clicks and nods that I think that the work picks up on each other that have to formulate a really cool conversation. So yeah, that's basically why I'm here. Well, I don't know. What should we talk about? Should we just talk about some specific works? Do you have anything you want to say before we get into things, Yelmer?
Well, I'm just thankful to be here as a Nuu-chah-nulth guest and be welcomed last night. It meant a lot. And to see some of you back again this evening is really great to see. And thanks to Janelle for putting together a great show. And you've had a few hiccups along the way. The show was pre-COVID, post-COVID, and COVID. But I'm really thankful to be here with all of you. And the warm welcome, kind words from you, Sonny. Really great to show together finally.
Yeah.
And we've tried a few times in the past, and finally it's happened. So thankful to be here in your community. Yeah, true.
Cool. Well, I think Humor as Medicine is a really interesting title because to me it really shows and explains the resilience that Indigenous peoples have and that we do have throughout this colonial construct. I think for me, humor is one of the things that I explored first in my career as a young artist that helped propel me to where I am today. And it's something that always kind of threads its way through my work. And I think about my grandmother when I talk about humor in my work, because she always told me that our culture and language has inherent humor into it. And I think being able to bring this up in the work is just a really interesting experience. Because I think that if I'm able to approach you with my work that has humoristic elements behind it, you are going to be more willing to understand those harder conversations that we as Indigenous peoples want to have. And I think probably the really good example of that is my Breakfast series from 2016, where I created that with that in mind, where I wanted to bring people into these conversations through the use of humor, kind of break down those barriers, open them up, and let people kind of take in some of the issues that I was tackling within this work. It was an interesting work to make back in 2006, but it's been interesting to see it become alive over the past decade and a half. It's in a couple different collections, and it's been showed widely across Canada and the United States. And every time that it is seen, I usually get comments on Instagram or Facebook or to my email about people talking about the work and how it's affected them and how it's made them think about different things in relation to the relationship that settlers have with the Indigenous peoples. And I really appreciate that the conversations that come out of it, because it helps me see things from different angles and different lenses as well. When I first made this work, it was just a way for me to have a good chuckle and to make something funny. But as I started to really think about it and think about the issues that were important to me, it really highlighted the way that humor breaks down those barriers. I think the biggest transformation for me is to see how, when I was making this work, I wasn't really thinking about food security or food insecurity, but with that becoming more of an issue, especially in the north here in Canada, where we see Indigenous communities having to pay $26 for a jug of orange juice or $32 for a box of cereal. It becomes very poignant that we have issues that we are addressing. And I think as we take a look at the show and go through it, like I said, you'll pick up those notes of connections between Hjalmer and my work. So we have the breakfast series over here, and we have his newer work over here, which I thought was an interesting connection for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was so excited to see this work installed because I've seen it in photographs, I've seen it online, I've seen it in publications for so many years, and it's one of those works that I think really opened the door for an entry point for everyone. Because you see those boxes and we all know them. No matter where you're from, you know the box, and it gets a little bit of the door open. Yeah. And, growing up, trying to bring humor into work, it can be seen as really ironic and sometimes in a really negative way. I think a lot of my work, I've been talking to Janelle when we're playing the show, and I was like, I don't know if my work is really funny or not. I think it's funny, but the moment I present it, I feel like the audience kind of turns away right away. And works like this are a way to actually welcome people in a bit. And it starts that grounding, so you can start having these bigger works around the space, like these ones here, which to me are so important. But this work is one that opens the door for these ones to have that conversation. And this one here, I think it's such a connection to Sonny's piece. So I'm excited it can be in a space. We can go over and take that do not touch sign off. let people touch this one. Don't touch Sonny's, but you can touch mine. There we go. Here you go, Janelle. Here you go. Oh, you want to rip it up? Throw it on the ground? Yeah, there we go. Burn it all down! This one is, that's breakfast. I guess that's lunch. Yeah. Someone's going to do dinner next. I guess so. This is mainly about salmon farming, really, and the impact that Atlantic salmon has had on the West Coast. Especially our nations here on our side of the island, the West Coast as well. And it's, it started off with a different work that Janelle wanted that wasn't available because it sold to AGTV down in Victoria. And so it was kind of this scramble of trying to figure out which work I wanted to do with it. Feel free if you want, actually, truly, go up, pick up a can, take a look at it. But a little bit of a play, and like I said, really kind of a show back to you as well, Sonny, for your work. So go ahead, pick them up. Take a look. The non-bentwood box is a board that drifted in on Long Beach in my territory. And it's a plastic board, plastic lumber, and we actually curved it and cut it and bent it just as you would with a steam bent box. And then pinned it together, so it's, I guess you could say, made as traditionally as it could be for a bentwood box, but it's not wood. And then the canned salmon, which was a work that I was going to do with the previous work that Janelle had wanted for the show, which was a styrofoam cooler that was carved as a bentwood box. More of a visually appealing piece to me, to be honest, but it was sold and gone. I was never going to make it again. One of those works you only make once.
I think it's interesting when you take a look at this, to hear the story of how this piece came about. Like you're saying, you had this fake lumber drift up on the beach, and you took it and finished it and created it in the ways of your ancestors did for bentwood boxes. Was pretty amazing because it also speaks to the environmental concerns that we're facing here in BC and on the island with the effect of old growth logging. And us as Indigenous peoples having, being the stewards of these forests and of these lands, what are we looking at in the future for making our works, making our contemporary or community-based works, are we going to be able to make them with these sacred logs anymore in the future? So it becomes an interesting commentary of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially we feel it now, right? I mean, we felt it for maybe the last 40 years, but the majority of BC is noticing it now with the impact that we have. We're just not going to have access to those things anymore. And so that was the intent of the original work that was going to be in the show. And it was I was living in Victoria doing my master's, and I couldn't find wood in Victoria, which is on the island, and I still couldn't find large enough old growth to do anything with. And so I started off, I made a totem pole out of 2x4s. I don't know if you've seen the work or not. It's a 12-foot totem pole, and I made it all out of 2x4s. And then it started off this kind of trajectory of figuring out, well, how can I still make traditional items in the most traditional way while using materials that I'm kind of facing now? And this came up at the time when all the debris was coming over from Japan after that the big tidal wave that hit in Japan. So the West Coast, especially Tofino, Taloquia, the area where I live, it had so much debris coming up on the shore. And so one day my brother walked the beach, it's a heavy board, it was like a 12-foot long plastic piece of lumber, and carried it back. And he's like, I knew you were going to do something with it someday. And then it sat in the shed for about 10 years or 8 years. Finally it was the time to still try to follow in as much tradition. And this is that weird balance. I don't know if you find it too, but making some of these items, I don't want to show them to my community. There's some things you make and you're like, I don't really want it to make fun of, because it's not the intention at all. It's to make fun of my own culture, but it's to put question to how can my culture exist now? How can we find a way to continue tradition while we're making bentwood boxes out of plastic boards, without making fun of the bentwood box.
Yeah, exactly. And how it evolves, right? That's one of the questions there, the kind of comments from the community that I would get in my, the earlier part of my career is where are you going with this? What are you doing? I had one of my uncles actually pull me aside and say, you should really stop doing this work because it's not honoring our ancestors. But I said to him, well, this is, who I am. This work that is of pop culture and Ligwiłda'xw culture is me. It's who I am as an individual. I am, I look white, but I don't identify as white because for me, what is white? For me, it's pop culture. It's being immersed in that. So, being able to take those notions of ancestry and heredity and be able to bring them forward in the future in a respectful way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the line that we both dance as artists is how do we bring these conversations to the community without feeling we've offended anyone. And I think that for the most part, we've probably done a really good job in connecting with the communities and telling people exactly what we're doing and what our messages are and what we're trying to do. And for me, I've been able to have people from all over Canada and North America send a message I'm a kid, I live, somewhere remote, and all I see is traditional art, which is beautiful, but I don't really feel like it belongs to me. And to be able to see you take the breakfast series or the superheroes or the Mickey Mouse, whatever it is, and build it into something different inspired me. Mm-hmm. And I think that we could see a lot of that right now, what's going on with a lot of the makers that are, if you're on Instagram and see the Indigenous makers that are really adapting and bringing in pop culture to the work and expanding it in ways that I had never thought of. And I think that's really amazing to see how those influences are out there.
What do you think about who you make your work for?
What's that?
Do you ever have to answer that question, who do you make your work for? When you're doing your master's, I'm sure they said that, what are you an artist for?
Yeah.
And so many people say, I make work for myself.
Yeah.
That's bullshit. At a certain point, it's bullshit.
It's an easy answer.
It's an easy answer, and it's an easy out, and you can end the conversation, and maybe that's a good thing to do. Yeah. But I think, the work that I see in here, the majority of it, I'd say we make for other people. Yeah. We're making that work to have a conversation. We're making that work to create some form of dialogue. The neon sign, I thought I was making it for this greater public, and that was the intention of the work. And then I plugged it in, and I had a critique in first year last year my master's, and I was as I was done the critique, I was oh, that was actually one I had made for myself. Yeah. That was the one work unintentionally I had made for myself. Right. Whereas everything else I'm making for everyone else. Yeah. I'm making it for the public. I'm asking them to come respond to it. Mm-hmm. And works like these, I think, ease people into having works like those ones over on that side, which are way harder conversation to have. Right? Yeah.
You were talking about these arcade. Well, I mean, they're interesting because I think there's some parallels to what Yelmer was talking about in the found plastic woods that his brother found on the beach. I think it comes down to it as well as how we're looking at where we're sourcing our materials and where we're getting our materials from. From an artist standpoint, one interesting conversation I had with people over the years about this work is that, sourcing materials from a hardware store isn't something that is normally associated with fine art or with higher end art. So it's interesting to be able to bring that conversation to the work. But basically, with these pieces, is I wanted to think about how my ancestors would view me at the time I spent in front of machines like this as a kid. Thinking speculatively about bringing an ancestor out of the timeline, bringing him to now, someone who hasn't experienced colonialism, and seeing me standing in front of the machines, just spending my time, because time is valuable, right? And that's why there's a relationship to copper there, that they would assume that I've been brought to some kind of different realm. And they become conversations around our current conditions here in so-called Canada and North America, when we're taking a look at treaties being broken on a regular occurrence. We have this process called reconciliation, which was broken, and I arguably say it was dead from the get-go. And so this is what these two pieces become conversations on. And using humor into reconciliations becomes really poignant and important, especially when we take a look at the first Indigenous Survivors Day that we had here recently, and with Justin Trudeau going down into Yelmer's territory and just having a surf vacation. The biggest conversation I had with my wife at home was like, okay, would he do this on Remembrance Day? Would he just do a couple of days phone calls on November 10th and skip off for a couple of days because he's got a staff? He would get raked over the coals. And he arguably did get raked over the coals for what he did this past weekend. And so for me, that really just signifies that, reconciliation is a broken process. Reconciliation is for the settler, it's for the colonizer. For myself, reconciliation is within my community, is within my connection to my culture and understanding. So on one hand, I feel reconciliation is dead, but on the other hand, I feel it's alive because we do have these opportunities to reconcile within each other. And for me, the biggest one is within my community with that. So those are those pieces there. So, and they just came about randomly. I always had this idea to make these arcade cabinets. And I was just in London Drugs here one day looking at a new monitor for my computer setup. And the guy that was working in the shop that day happened to build these with a friend of his. And we just got talking about, what do you want the monitor for? Oh, I'm an artist. Oh, I'm an artist too. What do you do? What do I do? And then it came out I build video game machines. And I'm like, oh, okay. Give me your contact info. And that's how these pieces came about.
What year are these from?
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
And just growing more and more important.
Yeah.
As time goes on.
Exactly.
Right? That reconciliation, that hashtag flew around.
Yeah.
On September, or I guess October 1st.
Yeah.
That spelled that way.
Right.
Reconciliation.
Yeah.
And it was these have become even more important since the making of them. And I think that's where, I came in and saw this one, and my mom walked over and she's like, look at the broken copper out here, and then look over there. Did you guys call each other and plan it out? And I didn't know what works you were going to have in the show, and you didn't know, but they worked so well, right? And coming into the space, it was okay, that piece alone, some people need some education with. Yeah. And it's here, and it's here. It works this way around the room, that if you walk through, you can kind of figure out the story yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's an easing you need to do for people. Mm-hmm. I made copper shields in my master's 6, 7, 8 years ago, and people didn't understand the shape.
Right.
And so, the general public in Victoria, Vancouver, didn't know the shape, which to our people is the basis of our foundation of who we are, right? Yeah. And so now we're getting to a point where general public, we'll call it reconciliation, or becoming knowledgeable, or hearing truth, and with that starting to understand a little bit more. And these works I find just grow in that time.
Yeah.
So I came in and my daughter wanted to play it, but
Yeah.
I came in and I was so excited to see this because they tie so well with what's happening right now.
They do, yeah. And I think that's the beauty of this conversation that the show is having, is that it, these works, so 2017, whatever year your piece might have been, it's just these cornerstone pieces that just have this relevance, that this carries forward from their date of creation until, time immemorial. And I think copper is a very important conversation. I've been using copper for within my conversations, within my work for a very long time. Since 2009 is when I started experimenting with the use of copper in my work. And it's something that I haven't really turned away from, either from the use of the materials itself or the symbol of the copper that I use within my paintings and drawings and etc. We got these cameras that are set up around the room. It's called Colonial Eyes Are Watching You. The old Hall Note song. Private Eyes Are Watching You. That's a little tongue-in-cheek thing there. So I made this work in 2013, or the original one in 2013 actually, and I did a show at the Oakville Galleries in Oakville, Ontario. And it was just like a big, it was a solo show, just like a kind of overview of my work from the start to 2013. And there just happened to be this defunct old gallery camera up in the corner, and I was surveying the gallery with the curator, and just looking at the space. He's like, "Oh, you happy with it?" I'm like, "Oh, it looks really good, really good." And I just mentioned I saw the corner of my eye the camera. I'm like, "Oh, what's with that camera there?" And at the time I was copper leafing everything. And he says, "Oh, it's broken, it hasn't worked in years, we could pull it down if it's distracting." I'm like, "Can I copper leaf it?" And I did, and it was just this new kind of guerrilla piece that just kind of was in the gallery for that show. And then I had an opportunity to do them again with these shapes, with these actual camera covers, and Art in the Open in Prince Edward Island for a festival out there, and had them installed in the woods. And basically, I just wanted to talk about the value that we place on our privacy and how we are becoming an overly surveilled society, whether that's from the devices that we have in our pockets that are looking at me right now, to the fact that we just have facial recognition and surveillance society built in around us. So what is the value of our privacy? Is basically what I'm asking out with these pieces. And also considering where we are located right now with our homeless population that lives here in Campbell River, and how they're being overly surveilled and pressured by the local BIA to move on. Don't gather around here, don't camp out here at night. But they really have nowhere else to go. And so they're always being surveilled. And I just wanted I wanted people to kind of feel uneasy about these cameras just watching them as they walk around the gallery, just kind of feel like they're being overly surveilled. But they're also surveilling the other artworks in the show. So I've tried to purposely make them look at specific artworks in the show, mainly Yelmer's and Laurie's, just to kind of have these eyes that are looking at them. And I think the funniest one for me is the camera that's looking at John A. McDonald's statue over there, holding a burrito. So yeah, copper is definitely a big connection to both of our works, and like you said, it's a big connection for a lot of the West Coast peoples, and it's a conversation that definitely has deep roots and meaning.
And yet it's also like a lot of work to explain to the audience what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Sometimes you feel like you have to really educate.
Yeah.
And I find with a lot of these works, there are opportunities for us to say something that we don't usually say.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of your work in the time of Idle No More, or my work in the time of Idle No More, where we were just so fatigued of going down with like a placard and a banner, and having to say it louder and louder on the steps of Parliament or the legislature, and I found this was a space that we could do that in, and that's where your cameras, they're so confrontational.
Yeah.
And in that they're funny, but they're also really taking a space where instead of shouting it and going around town and being like, Sonny's angry about all the cameras and the fact that our homeless population is being constantly, confronted, we're going to bring it in the gallery, and we're going to confront an audience who usually maybe doesn't hear us saying those things.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the gallery has a really important role to play, and then it's our role in that space as well. Mm-hmm. I'm just too tired to go and yell and scream and rah, 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 but we do it here in just maybe a calmer way.
Yeah.
But we're still doing it. I mean, a broken copper on the wall, we saw Bo do that, down in Victoria, and it had a really big impact. Mm-hmm. But how many times did Bo have to do that before it was heard?
Yeah, right.
And so, okay, now that he did that work, I can do this work. And I don't have to go and stand on the steps and do it. Right?
Yeah. People have always, I don't know if people have asked you this, but people have always asked me if I feel that I'm an activist for my work. And I've never really felt comfortable, when I was asked this in the past, I never really felt comfortable saying that I was an activist or not an activist, because I felt that activism was like boots on the ground, frontline people, doing the local things and standing up and picket lines and confronting, the wetsuit and basically, what was going on with the wetsuit and all the stuff that's going on in the legislature and all that stuff. So basically, activism to me was, you have to be out there doing the activist stuff. But as I've come to terms with it, I've kind of come to understand now that we do have our placement in activism with the work that we make, because it brings it to, a different audience, right? Not necessarily a broader audience, but a different audience. Mm-hmm. Where you kind of come into a gallery, you feel like you're in a safe space, and you're confronted with those conversations. And there is an element of activism that I feel that I am okay with claiming now. So I don't know how you feel about that, if that's something that you've considered or...
Yeah, I think I felt the exact same way. I felt, when I did my master's degree, I was tired of having to be an educator, because I would confront instructors with work or professors with work, and they would either, kind of back away slowly or run away really quickly because they didn't feel that they had enough education to critique the work.
Yeah.
They felt too out of place by understanding what's happening here to be able to bring their dialogue into it.
Yeah.
So I felt at first you're like an artist, and you're an educator, then you're a historian, then you're an activist, and like you're doing all this work as an Indigenous contemporary artist, especially when you're trying to make, people know a little bit, or at least be aware of what's happening around them. Mm-hmm. And then we had Canada 150, and that was also the year of reconciliation, and that was also the year Trudeau bought a pipeline, and like there's so many things that you want to be angry about, or at least educate about, and so you have to decide to take that role on.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not just an artist anymore, I have a lot more work to do. Mm-hmm. And then you think about art communities, I mean, artists historically, we didn't have a word for art or artists in Nuu-chah-nulth territories, but that was really our job. I mean, totem poles weren't an artwork. They had so much more into them, which included being a historian, being an activist, being a politician, being so many things. And so we think maybe we're just evolving that lack of a term for us, but we'll go under artist because that's nice and easy.
Yeah.
We can kind of slough off all the rest of the terms by saying an artist, right? But I mean, that's just work artists do, I think.
I think so, yeah.
It's tiring to have to put pins on all of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's sometimes you'd say, this is my own activism, because I'm not going to be, writing another placard up, and I can't do it anymore, and there's too much to do it for. I mean, you see those people who are on the ground there every weekend, every week, every day, because there's so much to be angry about. There's so much that needs to be heard. And in spaces like this, or AGDV, or Vancouver Art Gallery, you're hitting a really specific group of people, and sometimes those people need to hear a little bit more than they know.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. What else can we talk about?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
I want to be out of line here. I appreciate what you've done using humor to open the door, if that's a good say. Do you have a vision of where you're going to be in a couple of years? Do you anticipate being able to use humor in providing a solution?
I guess it just depends on what solution we're looking for. I personally don't feel that when we take a look at quote-unquote reconciliation, that I am part of the solution. As an Indigenous person, I feel that the pressure and the relevance of reconciliation needs to be the burden on the shoulders of settlers. And people who are descendants of settlers and people who are descendants of colonizers. So I mean, I don't think I want to make a work that leads people that says that directly. I want people to find it out for themselves. And I think what I do in my work is I leave a lot of breadcrumbs for people to follow. Okay, so Sonny has said, oh, he talks about the potlatch band in his work. What does he mean by the potlatch band? What is that? So, you fire up Google, you look it up, you go to the library, you look it up, and you find out what has actually happened in Canada's past and what the potlatch band meant, for example. So basically, I just kind of look at myself as, just leaving those breadcrumbs, and hopefully people will follow them and pick them up and ingest them and use that energy to fight the fight that needs to be fought. And that's a specific moment, whether it's reconciliation, environmental issues, or whatever it might be.
I found that really interesting. I was reading an article today about Laurie Mondo's work, and I just want to make sure that we include her. As Sonny was saying, she's not able to be here, but in this article they were talking about how they wished, or there was a critique of Laurie's work that suggested that she should present a more positivist image, which is essentially what you're saying in kind of solution-based thinking. And she utilizes the term squaw in her artworks, and she talks about the fact that she's not using it to reappropriate the language because it was already theirs. She doesn't have to take something back that's been misused, and has created this kind of dichotomy for the Indigenous woman between the Indian princess and the squaw, but rather that she can live in that and she can use it to make parody and to make humor, and that there's no necessity for her to reappropriate that language, and there's also no necessity for her to be apologetic because she already has to bear the burden of representation that Indigenous women bear. And so for her to be able to create this kind of parodic and humorous work does exactly as Sonny's saying. It creates this trail of understanding and places the responsibility back onto the viewer. And that's the great thing about a lot of these really critical artworks, is that they're here to create a dialogue. They're here to create a sense of wanting to inquire about what is the history of these words, or how have they been utilized, and how have they been kind of appropriated by the colonizer. And I really respect what she's saying there. And you can see that she does it here with this kind of white surfer culture. She's arranged herself as a pinup, but she's also placed herself in a particular place where starlight tours were done, and that's where cops used to take Indigenous men out in the middle of winter and leave them there in the cold, so they would have to try to get home. So not only is she doing something really funny, but if you dig a little deeper, she's also really bringing out an injustice that was done against people that other people may not know about. And so there is this kind of multi-layered aspect to something that she's creating. Does anyone else have a question?
We can get more questions.
Yeah.
I'll take one on the solutions thing. To me, that seems like a very good kind of, like we're in this kind of discussing colonialism and Indigenous culture, and that seems a very colonialist question to me. So how do you, like, when you were both talking, you're talking about journeys, you're talking about moving through things, not necessarily getting somewhere. And how do you interact with that in your art? Like, how do you keep I guess this is another kind of education thing. How do you manage to keep doing that? How does that come out in your art?
I think for me, it's just, taking what's going on in our contemporary realities and repurposing it into something aesthetically pleasing. I'm thinking of a piece I made last year in support of the Nuu-chah-nulth fishery when they were told by the DFO and they were attacked by the racist non-native fishery peoples. Their warehouses burnt down, their lobsters were destroyed, their traps were destroyed. And for me, that's happening currently. That happened last year or a year and a half ago. But the roots of it are way back here, right? It happens way back in time, and I think people don't understand that these contemporary realities that Indigenous people are facing are rooted in that past. But people like to root those conversations that are happening here, will get over it because it happened in the past. But the reason it's happening now is because it happened in the past. And unless we address it, we're never going to get past it. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons for me to make the work that I do, and to put a lot of political context into the works that I'm making. Just because it becomes a way to satiate that hunger for people to understand where we're coming from, to pick up those breadcrumbs and move forward. Like the piece on the back wall there, Chief Speaker, that's a quote from Stephen Harper from 2009, where he went up at the G20 summit and said those words: Canada has no history of colonization. So we have none of the things that, I can't remember where offhand right now, that bother them or whatever, right? Fully misquotes the quote, but it's on the wall if you want to go read it. And it's done. He was also given a Blackfoot name, Chief Speaker. And this is the color palette that I used there was the colors that were given to him on his headdress and the war paint on his face. But this, it's really interesting to see that we have people in positions of power saying these words and denouncing colonialism while they're living in a colonial state, benefiting from the colonial spoils, right? And no one's immune to it. Trudeau's not immune to it. He said a bunch of cherry stuff over the last couple of years that I'm just waiting to make work on. It's interesting to see that there's so much effort that goes into hiding the past that, of course, we're going to be doomed to repeat it. And that's where we are today.
No. What was the question again? No, I'm joking. I think we could be politicians and not get as far. We could be musicians or artists, we could be chefs and still be doing the work that you're going to do. I think reconciliation, the word right from the get-go is faulty. It's to rebuild a broken relationship that was once strong. There was never a relationship that was strong to rebuild. And so out of the idea of truth and reconciliation, we can focus on some truth. And in terms of the solution, if I had one, I'd offer it. Because we all want one. And we don't know what the solution is. We see a past Prime Minister try to get rid of the Indian Act as a way to make it better. And we see that another generation later trying to do pretty much the same thing. We've had a couple Trudeaus having this attempt and throwing something at the wall that's not sticking. But if we can't get to reconciliation yet, maybe it's dead, maybe it never happened, so we don't know how to get there, we can start with truth. And if we can find some truth, we can have a little bit of level ground, then we can respect each other. Right now, it's just so far apart. Individually, we can respect each other. Individually, we can build relationships with one another. But there's so much untruth being spoken that we don't know how to do it. And even one-on-one, even individuals now don't know how to hold their tongue among certain people because Orange Shirt Day is coming up, but I haven't bought one yet. Like, what am I going to do? We have these individual little challenges we're trying to overcome because we don't know where we should stand. And we haven't figured out some of the politics in our own nations yet that need to be figured out. There's so much work that needs to be done, and politicians are sitting there shrugging their shoulders and going on a vacation to Tofino to go surfing instead because it's too much. No one knows where to start. So on one hand, I'd say, no, we don't have solutions, but on the other, no one else does either. And so I think this is a great place to start finding some truth. I think this is a great place to start having those conversations and saying, what's the solution? There's also a danger to that question because we maybe think we can find it, which we can't. But I think if nothing else, we can start pointing out truths. And that's where the show with humor eases it in, and then it gets pretty damn serious. You read that quote by Harper, and you go, oh my, this isn't funny, but I'm in it now, and I have to react. I don't have a choice. I'm in the show. I can turn around and I can walk out, but I've confronted it now. And so you're hitting truth. Maybe we're not at reconciliation. Maybe we're not even at respect, and that's okay. We're moving slow. 150 years went by really quick. I imagine if, we hit the reset button right now, we have 150 years to level it back out. It's not going to change overnight, but it's going to start, and I think it does start with art, and it did in the past. You look at the impact that a copper can have in our communities, and the breaking of a copper, an act that really puts artists at the forefront. is about relationships. And so if you can start that in a space like this, I think we're moving to reconciliation quicker than hearing a bunch of politicians yell and scream at each other with a speaker in the middle trying to keep peace.
Yeah.
So I'd say this is a place of truth, hopefully. And some people will walk in and say that's pretty and walk out. Yeah. That's okay too.
That is okay.
And that is okay.
That's totally okay. And I think I think it's important to highlight that there's aesthetics in the work that we create that we want people to enjoy and to take in. But there's an underlying thing that comes up. We can talk about it. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Harper piece, because then right across from him is the founder of this country, the guy who said all these wonderful quotes that are on the side of the blimp there about Indigenous peoples. You know, and that just shows that the roots of colonialism are so deep that even prime ministers today can't see the way around it. Even though they talk the game of seeing around them, but then they come around the next day and say something stupid.
Well, that's we all do that every day.
Yeah.
Should we walk this way? I feel like we should walk this way.
Yeah.
That side of the gallery is pulling us over, I think. Yesterday, Sonny's uncle was looking at the copper work and walked right over half the pieces on the floor. I think it was like the best interaction I saw in the gallery.
And then he looked down and said, well, maybe I shouldn't be sorry.
Yeah, maybe I should kick him.
So when you guys see something or hear something that makes you react in a way that's like, I need to make an art about this, how do you balance the I want to smack people over the head with it versus make them sort of have to discover things on their own, or like you were talking about the breadcrumbs versus like, come on, that's hitting me in the face, you know? So how do you determine that balance?
I think there's times where we need to hit someone over the face, and I think there's times where, like, that doesn't have a didactic panel with it, because I mean it doesn't need one, but nor does that one. And to some people that may just be a shape on the wall that doesn't make sense. There may be some metal on the floor they don't get. With words, they get a little bit, but then they walk away. And then there's this one here, which I refuse to like share anything about. It just is what it is, and take it or leave it. I think that as an artist, you have this responsibility to your viewer. A little bit. I mean, like I said earlier, we can say we're making work for ourselves, but there is this responsibility to the viewer. This one here, I mean, we're in a time of statues coming down left, right, and center, and everyone has something to say about it. You know, your grandma has something to say about it, your kids have something to say about it, every person you bump in on the street has a perspective or has opinion. And a lot of the time I feel like we're called upon to react to that opinion. So much so that Sonny tried to buy the statue, but I had already bought it.
Minutes too late.
It's just a little too late on Facebook Marketplace. Yeah, go ahead. I'm done with it now. Knock it over. Yeah. But because, you know, we have this responsibility where we're not politicians, because we're not, you know, trying to be divisive anymore. I don't think we're trying to be divisive anymore. We have this call to say, okay, react, because we want to know where you stand. We want to have this, you know, another perspective that we wouldn't usually get. It'd be easy to have the plinth there and kick them off and say, there we go, that's the artwork. But it's also happened down the street. It also already happened in Victoria 3-4 times over, and we also saw totem poles get burnt in response. So where's our responsibility in that? And there's a individual responsibility, there's a collective responsibility, there's a, you know, we have these kind of layers that we're working in. I've heard so many times that taking down statues is erasing history. We've heard it over and over. Like, I've never learned history by looking at a statue. I've learned history by looking at totem poles, only because I can read them in the way I know how. Or someone's offered me a teaching and explained it to me and walked me through a totem pole. I can read my poles, but I would come over here, I come to see Kwakwaka'wakw poles, and someone needs to guide me and teach me what I'm looking at, because it's a different language. So we have a man on a plinth. We can be angry, we can be happy, we can say, an artist put time into making that sculpture, and isn't that great? So when the one came down in Victoria, because there was a John A. Macdonald kind of larger than life size John A. Macdonald statue that came down in Victoria, the city of Victoria removed it. And there was, you know, this outcry of success, he's finally gone, as if there was a thought that maybe that did erase history. Like people were like, yay, he's out! And it's like, yeah, he's been gone for 140 some odd years actually. He hasn't been around, you know? And then the city of Victoria was like, now what?
Yeah.
You know, like, shit, what do we do? You know, so they wrapped him up and they stuffed him in a basement. And he was like, well, that didn't help explain the history. That, I mean, taking that away doesn't do much. So, you know, we all had conversations, what do you do now? And I had said to my wife, I was like, I want to bring it back out. I want to call the artists and call the city and bring that statue into an art gallery or into the Royal BC Museum where it's meant to educate about history and install it. And let's get together and have a conversation. Because without it there, there's no visual reminder. We go problem solved, colonization's over, we reconciled, we took down some statues. So there's this line of what do you do? So it's easy to knock them over and say, let's have a conversation about it on the ground. But I'm not going to be here every day. You got me tonight for 2 hours. So let's just, that history that we didn't erase when it was taken down, let's write some of it on the plinth. Yeah, there's some good history. I didn't write that. We've all learned it. The founder of the country.
This is stuff that you don't learn in school.
This is what you don't learn.
This is what you don't learn. And I think that's the kind of catch with these types of works, these statues that celebrate people like John A. You know, he's on our money. You know, why do we have a racist, genocidal, Aryan-leaning person on our money and statues around our country? Just because he's seen as the father of Confederation. His time is gone. So I think removing those statues from public doesn't necessarily erase the history. It's, like you said, what we do with those statues afterwards and the conversations we have after. So taking this stuff that you can find online, you can find on Wikipedia, and putting it into history books and teaching our kids, our age kids, that history, so they know not to repeat it. Right? Because then when you see this, you can just have a good chuckle at it and not realize that it came from this asshole.
And that it's a continuum.
Yeah, exactly.
One question. So, I heard you say that you get tired of having to be an educator. And then I heard you say sometimes you just want to make something that is, you know, aesthetically pleasing, or maybe that's what some people will just get out of it. They won't look any deeper than that. But that there's also this breadcrumb thing. And so I wonder, as artists, do you sometimes want to just create something that doesn't have to be political, or do you find that because of who you are, it's always going to be political? Like sometimes you just want to go, I don't want to be the spokesperson, I just want to create stuff because it moves me, not necessarily for me, sometimes for me, but also just like I want to create it because there's another thing I want to talk about. Like, do you find that you sometimes are like, oh, why do I always have to carry this?
I think the word responsibility comes up in that conversation, and I have those two little kids that are being actually very quiet, but every now and then I feel like they're being loud. When my daughter was born 5 years ago, it was like, all right, I don't feel like doing this right now. You know, I don't. And in trying to raise my kids in the most Nuu-chah-nulth way I knew, we moved back home to our community, and we live at Tyestanis, and you're trying to give them all the tools to be the best people they can be. So my wife is learning the language and teaching it to our kids, and as we kind of moved home, it was like, you know what, I don't want to be angry. I really don't, but you have to be. I mean, you're confronted with these opportunities to be angry all the time. And so I actually kind of backed away. There's actually, if you look at the years of my work, there's a pretty big gap. And that was when I had kids, and I was like, I'm just going to carve. So you talk about 3 dialects of work. I had this contemporary dialect, which is probably the most well-known, but I love carving. I mean, that's how I started in the arts, was carving. And it was like, you know what, I'm going to just carve for a few years. And with that, we started an art gallery, which is not like this. It's a commercial art gallery to support other carvers and jewelers and printmakers, and kind of went in a different direction to say, there's still a responsibility though. I can't just kick my feet up and say, I'm just going to do it for me. It was, how do I carry that responsibility forward? And if it's for my community or for my children or for, also for myself, to say, if I'm just doing this all the time, I'm just getting bogged down with it. But at the same time, I think this way, probably quicker. You know, I'll be walking along, you'll see something, I'm sure you do it too, and you're like, oh, I've got to make a work about that later. And you either put it in your phone or you write a note down really quick because you're like, this is something that's going to nag at me forever. But in the last few years, I've kind of backed away from this a little bit to make art and carve and make work for my community. We just raised 2 poles in our nation, and we're working on another pole this coming January. that work is so rewarding because you're giving it for your community, you're rewriting these histories that have had a break for 150 some odd years. You know, I mean, there hasn't been a pole raised in our community since Captain Gray burnt them down in the 1780s. And there was 200 when he burnt them down. And so it's like, okay, we put up the first one. And you go, what is, I mean, that's a huge honor, but it's also a big responsibility. Because after you put the first one out, it was like, okay, 199 more to go.
Yeah, for me, I think diversity is the key for me in my work, is just doing a lot of different things. I think a lot of the work that you see here that I have definitely has that kind of political tinge to it. There's a responsibility that I take within it to formulate these conversations, to think about being an activist while being an artist. But the series that I have that's in Vancouver right now, that's coming down this weekend, at the Equinox Gallery, is just work I made purely for the fun of it, and just because it was my passion. And I think when I moved back home, that's when I really started to think about, not necessarily about being passionate about art again, it was just thinking at just making art for the sake of making art and doing what makes me feel happy and makes me feel right. And I think you can see that in the work. There definitely is, there's always going to be a conversation of otherness behind the work because of who I am as an individual, being Ligwiłda'xw and pop culture. And that's where the body of work that's in Vancouver talks about now, is bringing those two conversations together. Where it almost circles back around to the era of the Breakfast series and before, but it's an evolution. And I'm purely just making it based on what makes me feel good, what I think is going to be aesthetically pleasing, and what's going to make other people happy. Where they can just take a look at it and not have to worry about necessarily any underlying conversations that I might be having, because I have a whole body of work that does that, and more work down the pipe that's going to be doing that as well. So it's just all about finding that balance, right? Finding the balance of, I'm making something for me right now that's going to benefit other people, and I'm making something for me right now that's going to definitely benefit other people.
Thank you.
Other questions? We're putting this work up. I hadn't worked with Sonny before. We worked on something around Canada 150, but we ended up not having the opportunity to do it together. But I was putting this one up, and Sonny came in and went in the back and grabbed a screwdriver and a wrench and came out and started moving things around. My wife was helping me install this, and she said, "You just turned that camera to the statue. Is this show live streamed?" I thought these were just artwork. So I was like, "No, they are." And she's like, "Oh, Sonny thinks like you. I get it." I didn't know if it was a compliment or not at first, but I think it was. But I mean, decisions like that. I mean, I think to me that brought the humor back to the work a lot. And that was something that, you know, I of course wouldn't go and move your cameras around, but Sonny came in and saw us putting this up, and it was like instantly you see that artist come into action right away and starts turning the cameras and focusing them where they have to be, and I think that brought the humor back up again. And I think if you walk through the show and see the decisions that not only individual artists make, but also the curator makes, it's really about trying to find that balance. And I think that's what we're trying to do in life all the time, we're trying to find some balance. But things like that, I mean, that became my favorite element of the show, was you like going about how to do this properly. And that's where you see that artist come back again. So yeah, responsibility, I think, but I think that's the word I want to use, but it was just, it made me feel really, you know, it felt like we're doing the right thing here.
Yeah, for sure. I think it grounds it too, right? Because then it just helps formulate these conversations that, you know, we as viewers interact with the work in some sort of way, but the work generally doesn't interact with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that becomes interesting when you think about it in terms of a group show, when you have work that can actually interact with each other and be part of the conversation together, becomes really important. Yeah. Where it does, because this is such a heavy piece with these quotes that are real life quotes, so you kind of want to smack yourself on the side of the head and say, did somebody actually say this from Canada? And then you have this, and you have this, and then you put this eye on it where it just brings that laugh back to it, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can just kind of feel a little bit more at ease and take it in.
I would really agree with that too, and I think that's kind of the most rewarding aspect of being a curator, is seeing that like conversation come to life. Because you have a vision and you kind of think, okay, I'm pretty sure this is going to work out, and I've got all these moving pieces that I'm looking after and kind of holding space for, and then comes up and like, they're like little pockets make room themselves, like the space knows that something's going to come there and it's going to fit just exactly, and you can kind of rely on your instincts and on the way the work is going to converse across and with each other, and then all of a sudden you have this amazing amount of meaning kind of spring up out of things that are already great holders of meaning.
No, you take all the credit for that. You said it was all my idea. I planned it all perfectly.
I'd be interested to know, like, what was your curatorial pathway? Like, when you sort of decided, okay, I have this idea and I want to bring these particular artists together, what was your thought? And then I'm hearing that there were some little synchronicities or whatever that happened by happenstance, but yeah, like of what your original vision was and then what has transpired. What was that journey?
I know it's a time where we really need to have these conversations, and I see a lot of similarities between the way these artists work, but also they hold their own corner in the type of humor that they produce. And I know them to be very strong artists, and so my main goal was to elevate their voices in the space and allow for that conversation to happen. And so I could trust the process because some of the works are brand new, some of them are a little bit more historical to the practice of the artist, so then I know the older works, I don't know the newer works, so there's a kind of combination between planning and spontaneity that all kind of hinges upon elevating their voices.
And trust.
Yeah.
And trust. I mean,
I have a lot, yeah.
Thankfully, she trusted that it was going to come together. I mean, really, two of the works that Janelle wanted weren't available.
Right.
And then some of them were just like, it wasn't going to work to bring them. And so it was like, Janelle, do you trust me to bring some different works? And some of them which were new, I mean, it was kind of shocking me putting up this one and the culture sign behind these folks here. To me, they were like such a call to Sonny's works on that back wall. And so much so that it's like, oh, that's how he figured out the same issue that I have. And that's what it felt like. It was like, oh, man, I should have just got a camera. Like, how did Sonny figure it out? It would be much easier to pack that around than pack a neon sign everywhere we go. But in that, I mean, we had different thoughts going in, but we came out with ways that, you can see the difference in our style, but it also really complemented with just the trust that it was gonna work out while picking the work. So I knew what Janelle wanted, and I was like, that one's not available, that one's not available. And then also just letting it happen. When we came in the space, Janelle's like, here's where I think, let's make it work. I wish it was more of, I wish Laurie was here too, because there's so much more play that could happen with all three of us. But just reflecting on your work, I mean, it was like, we see these, and everyone in my family is like bumping me, they're like, hey, like, you seeing what's happening here? Like, it's working really well, And sometimes you don't know with a group show. You don't know if the work's going to play off or they're going to see this individual piece. But it almost feels like this was planned for 15 years. Good job.
Well, that's what Janelle said too when she talked about the piece that you were bringing up when we started talking about the show a while back. She said, Yelmer's got this thing called the pawn shop, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, I've got this stuff. And it's like it forms, it became a conversation, right? And it's just like, it does become a bit of a nudge to the group. It's like, hey, did you check this out? Because there's so many similarities here. Yeah.
And did you guys know each other before?
We met a couple times before, yeah. This is our first time showing you.
First time showing together, yeah. There was a plan to do some work for the Emily Kerr House.
Yeah.
For Canada 150, but we didn't end up getting funding for it. So we met a few times doing that, and then, like I said, I walked in and I was like, oh, great, I get to see that piece. Oh, great, I get to see that piece. Like, I've seen all of Sonny's work, but I was like, finally, I get to see them in person and, have them here with them. It's pretty exciting, yeah.
It was great too. Your mother shared a really beautiful story with me yesterday about the cereal boxes. I don't know if it's a personal story, but it was just really beautiful to hear that connection as well. So.
Well, that one ties so close to the culture sign without anyone doing it.
Yeah, right.
I can share a little bit of it. Sure. Yeah. Do you want to hear another story? Yeah. So this piece here, I don't know how long ago, 6-7 years ago, I had a brain operation. And after the operation, I had to learn how to read and write and walk. And I could talk. I was really lucky to be able to talk, but I had to start fresh about 8 or 9 years ago. And part of it, I came out, I couldn't draw anymore. And I was so heartbroken because I was, kind of constantly, I was in my second year at art school and I just couldn't use my hands anymore. I couldn't carve. And so I was just so heartbroken. And so Mum went out, we were in Vancouver, and Mum went out every day to try to find things to cheer me up, right? So she was like buying books and buying things, going out and buying all the books about carving and about art. And she bought this book, I don't remember what it was called, I think Peter Morin worked on it. Anyways, it had a whole pile of Sonny's work in it. And it was the first time I saw the cereal boxes work. And it was probably the first time I laughed, coming out of an operation, because it was, pretty hard to learn how to walk again and be happy at the same time. And I saw this book, and it was like the kind of calm that came in of like, it's going to be all right, you can do it. And so this huge library kind of built up around me, and I came out of the operation and decided I was going to go back to school, and I don't know why, but a couple weeks later went back to school, and then a year later, like, to the date, my dad had an aneurysm. And ended up in Vancouver having a brain operation, and I was on the other side. I was on the waiting room side, and it is so much worse. I'd rather have another brain operation than have to wait for my father to come out of home. And he came out, and he was far better off than I was, and he was sitting up already eating lunch, and so there was this calm that kind of set in, but all the emotion of waiting for someone to have an operation, I just kind of think about what my mom went through, and her thing was to like just keep bringing me things and trying to make me laugh, and so my aunt and uncle were there, and they're like, let's go out for dinner, like your dad's all right, let's go celebrate, we'll go to the spaghetti factory in Gastown. And we're like, who gives a shit about eating? Who gives a shit about fucking spaghetti? Like, we just wanted to sit by his bed all night, right, because he had made it through this operation. And I'd never been to Vancouver, really. Like, you just kind of go quick and go back home. You got your city clothes on for one day, and then you got to head back to the boonies. And so we went to go to the spaghetti factory, and all of us were so tired, and all we could think about was like getting back to see Dad after the operation. And there was no parking in Gastown. I don't know if people know Gastown very well, but I didn't. So we kind of went through, and they said, oh, there's cheap parking on the other side of Gastown. And the other side of Gastown is East Hastings, which I'd never been to. But we parked in East Hastings because the parking's cheap. And you walk through all of our own people. And it was the most shocking thing I think I'd seen. And it just felt like Alice in Wonderland or something like that. You went through Gastown, and there's a steam clock, and there's tourists and shops and neon, and it's like bye, bye, bye. And then right beside it is East Hastings, and you're walking through, and there was relatives on the street who you couldn't even talk to because they weren't there with you. And so I sat down with this lady and started talking to her. My aunt's like, come on, just don't look, just keep walking. And it just felt like so wrong. Like I shouldn't be here. This felt so wrong. So you walk out of East Hastings and you're in Disneyland. That's what it felt like. And it was just like, what the hell, And we're walking over to the spaghetti factory, and there's this lineup, 60 people long to get into the old spaghetti factory. And I was like, all right, cool, let's go. Like, let's leave. We're not doing that. And she's like, no, it's the best spaghetti. We'll just put our name down and we'll go be tourists. And it's like, none of us want to do that. We just want to go see Dad, And so we put our name down, and we had an hour to spend. And there was Spirit Wrestler Gallery. I don't know if you know old Spirit Wrestler Gallery. And there was a show happening. Spirit Wrestler Gallery is this big, First Nation art gallery. It's closed now, but kind of look in the window, and there's all this carvings and art. And I was carving full time. It was like, you get into Spirit Wrestler Gallery, and you kind of meet it as a carver. They have the big international market. That's like the place you want to end up at. So we're like, well, I guess we should go check it out. Like, I've never been here. Let's go in. So we open the door, and this guy comes over, and he's like, oh, no, sorry, it's a closed event. And I was like, well, we're just want to poke in, and that's my uncle over there, and that's my cousin over there. Like, we knew everyone that's in the show. And so my aunt, she's a real pushy, short little Nuu-chah-nulth woman. I'm sure you know them. And she's like, I'm going in. And she just barrels her way through. And it was like you went from one world to another world, and then you went into the art world. And it was such a joke. It was like flowy scarves and caviar. It was like what we make fun of, you know, and you walked into it, and it was a whole other world. And we walked around the show, and it was some art, but a lot of cultural objects being sold, like old dance masks, and things in that photo of Sonny's in the back there. And it was like, what are we doing? You know, like this just seems so wrong. And my Uncle Joe was there, and I was like, Joe, like what's going on here? This doesn't, I feel so weird. And he's like, well, you make the money, you can do it. Like if you can sell the piece for $30,000, I mean, take the money and run, right? And it was like, no, that's not right. I guess I don't want to be here anymore. And I started getting upset, and I after my brain operation, when I get upset, it was like I was starting to shake, and I was like, I gotta go, I have to get out of here. So we walked out, and there was a homeless guy sitting there, and I was like, I gotta do something, right? So I pulled out whatever money I had, and I walked over, and my aunt said, no, don't give it to him, only give it to Kuas people, only give it to our people. And I was like, the whole world's fucked. You know, that's what you felt like, the whole world, like we are so lost. And I turned around and looked at this gallery that was like where I was trying to end up at. And it had this big neon open sign on the door. And I was like, I just got so angry. I was like, they're not selling art anymore. You're selling culture, you're selling yourself, and I got like angrier and angrier. And I was like, I gotta go home and make a neon sign. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, you walk in there, it's not art, we're selling our culture, we're selling who we are, like it's too much. And I started like getting upset and more upset. A lot of it laid on the fact that my dad was laying in a hospital bed, you know, up the street. And so I went home and I was like, I went to the sign shop and I said, I want to make a neon sign that says culture. And the guy's like, yeah, it'll be like $3,000. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to the pawn shop. I'm going to start saving up some money to get the sign made. So I made the sign and I showed it, and everyone got angry. Like I showed it in my master's, the cohort, and everyone thought I was mad at them for buying First Nation art, or I was mad at the fact that we kind of rely on the art market to be able to survive as Indigenous people, and it became this really weird, like everyone took it on themselves. And I was like, no, it's for me. Like I just don't want to ever get to that place where I'm selling myself, or I'm selling my culture. And when does a joke go too far, or when do we have to sell those things to pay the rent? You know, like I gotta be careful of this. And so I made this sign and I plugged it in and I showed it that one critique, and I never showed it again. Because it wasn't funny, but it was like it needed to be said for myself. And then I plugged it in again about 2 years ago, and it just kind of took off as this piece that people all took it in their own direction. And at that point I was fine with it. At that point everyone had their feeling of Wet'suwet'en and the pipelines that were going across the country, and people were like, oh yeah, this is what we needed. And it was like, okay, if you need it, take it, because I don't think that story needed to be said anymore. Like it was my own thing. But then Mom walked in and she saw the cereal boxes and she's like, hey, that's like your brain operation. Like, do you remember that? Do you remember that book, Yelmer? And it was this kind of weird thing that these two stories, which have nothing to do with each other, finally came together. And she was actually so happy to see the culture sign and the cereal together. Yeah. And have no connection, really.
I think there's definitely a connection there. Like, I think if you dig back and look at those breadcrumbs and look at the cereal in both, I think there's definitely connections to the work that's there. And I think what's interesting, listening to you speak about that experience and, what you're doing in your grad program, I think there's a time where we're making work for just ourselves, we're making work for an audience, but then we're also making work for Baco people, for Indian people, for Indigenous people. That no matter where, if you're Kwakwakwa or Nuu-chah-nulth or Cree or Mi'kmaq, there's a conversation that's inherent to us that they will see it and they will understand it. So maybe the people in your cohort just didn't really get it. That work wasn't for them, but this work is for us.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, the more people see it now, the more they have their story that goes with it so quickly. They go, that's great. I want people to have it now. At the time, it was like I just kept it in my studio, and it was like my work to understand, and almost like a contract, I think, to hold myself to. And then it was like, all right, I think I'm set with what I'm going to do and how I'm going to find that balance, and other people need it, other people can have it now, but it's, and then I broke it. Janelle wanted it, and I dropped it and broke it. And neon is really expensive to get fixed. That work just goes up in value, because I keep having to fix it. And then I hung it up yesterday, 2 days ago, and it fell over and almost broke again. So luckily Janelle came in with the chains and saved the day.
We got you. Wow, this has been amazing. Does anyone else have any other questions? My cup is so full.
I have so many questions.
Do you want me to hold the camera?
No, I'll just ask them after. Well, actually, I do want to touch on something you were talking about, how people can take out of that whatever they need. And so how important to you guys both as artists is it that people take away from your work what you wanted to put into it? Like, is it, in terms of when you're producing a work, how important is it for someone to get the message that you wanted to give versus just you can take whatever it is that you find there?
Sometimes that very message is deep, and when people pick them up, I'm like, oh yes.
And sometimes we smack people in the face with that. And there's an importance to that, I think.
I just want people to experience it as art on that level. And what they take away is what they take away, and what they bring to me is what they bring to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting in that way because it becomes a conversation, right? Art to me isn't just like, here it is, this is what I mean. It's like, here it is, this is what I've meant. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then we have that conversation, and then like, I never thought about it before. I'm going to start folding that into my conversation. So it becomes like, it's the conversation and the collaboration.
Right. As opposed to when you're in art school and they're going through the meaning the artist made in historical things, and you're just like, well, that's not what I get out of it. Well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
What I got out of it is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, that's a weird thing to say.
It would be harder to get much more out of this than what it is. I hope. Some people may think it's celebrating those quotes, and maybe there is ways to get the wrong out of it. But I mean, I can't imagine seeing this work any other way. And I wouldn't want it to be, right? And that's why it's so like, okay, it's there. Originally, I was writing it white on the plant. It was like white paint on white paint. Because some people were going to get it and some people weren't. And then the white didn't work, and luckily Sonny's like, hey, I know a place that has copper ink. I'll go grab some for you. And I think it became more important. It's like, let's let people get it and sit in it for a minute, turn around and get it again, and then turn around and get it again and walk through the gallery understanding this. And then seeing these things makes it different to see those. You know, seeing those alone without seeing these, you're going to take something else away from the work. And so I think there's some pieces that are like really meant. I mean, this doesn't need a didactic panel because it is the didactic panel. And without it, that work is seen differently, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's the works we choose to put together that makes you walk away with something else. But I think sometimes I want a work to not be understood, and that's totally fine. Other times it's like, you don't get it. How big do I have to make this guy for you to understand, you know? Any other questions?
I have a question.
No.
No, but just, so you're both dads, and we're currently inviting schools and school groups to come and see the show. What would be the number one thing, or the top three, however many you want to name, that you hope kids will walk away with after seeing your show?
That's a good one. Yeah, because it's such a, kids is such a diverse audience. There's little kids like what we have, and then there's high school kids, and they all think differently. So, just envisioning my daughter and my son coming in here and just being immersed in the aesthetic quality of the arts and being encouraged to look around and to question. And I think as parents, especially Indigenous dads, we have an opportunity to really educate our children in a way that we didn't get educated. So if I could tell my daughter and my son, these are words that govern us till today, then they know where they stand, and they know how they can question, and they know how they can challenge.
So the other day, Trudeau was in my territory. He traveled on September 30th, which was the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Came to our territory. The first picture is him shirtless with a surfboard, getting ready to go catch a wave, and he was like, I have to do something. My brother and myself, it was like, okay, we have a responsibility. We have to react. I was making the work behind Sonny while it was happening. It was already a work I wanted to make. And it was like, okay, now I got to finish this work, and this is part of it. And then we went to go present our Prime Minister, and he is our Prime Minister, like it or not, our Prime Minister with a letter to educate him about what he did and how it was wrong. So my brother and I and a group of people went down to Chesterman's Beach and went to present this letter. And it's the biggest, rainiest day of the year. It was just thundering down. And the kids were in the back seat. And we were explaining, my daughter said, like, why are we going to the beach today? It's not a good day to go to the beach. And it was like, how do I explain to my 4.5-year-old what went wrong? How do I explain to this innocent, perfect little being what's wrong with the country we live in? And I said, well, there's this guy and he messed up and he has a position where he's not supposed to do things like that. And he kind of went through it like, first kind of talking like, you know, I was talking down to her a little bit. She's like, yeah, you know, I get that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I started kind of getting a little bit more reality and explaining what happened. And I was saying, well, you know, it was Orange Shirt Day the other day. And she went, yeah, I know. And I said, well, you know why we wear orange shirts? And she knew why we wear orange shirts. And she knew that what he did was wrong. And she was there to stay with us to present this letter to the Prime Minister. And I was sitting there talking to a 4-year-old, and I felt like I was talking to a 4-year-old. You know, you're looking up to her because she understood every element of it. And it was like, okay, there's so much hope. There's so much hope in that, because I've talked to 45-year-olds, and you have to be like, no, like listen up. Or I think about 45, you know, a Prime Minister that you're like, hey, by the way, I'm here to educate you. I explained it to my daughter in 5 minutes on the car ride here. Let me try again, and of course he never came out. But there's this responsibility to keep doing that over and over again. My daughter came in, the first thing she did want to go play Sonny's video games. And the next thing she wanted to do was sit and eat Sonny's cereal. And she walked around the shop and she was finding little treasures throughout. And that's it, that's enough. She got a little tiny bit, and that's gonna sit with her. And she's gonna let that grow and grow a little bit more. And it wasn't just a video game. It was a Kwok video game. It wasn't just cereal, it was Kwok cereal. And it wasn't just an art opening, it was a song that was given to our family out in the lobby while everyone was in here mingling away. Corey walked out and gave us a song that she's going to learn. And so in that small little event, she just instantly got all this education, all this treasure she's going to take home, and she's going to add it to her treasure box, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe not tomorrow, and maybe not in 10 years, but in 15 years something will come up and she'll be like, oh, this one time I was at Sonny's show, and it starts to build and build. So I hope, I don't want the kids to read this, but at the same time, they have to. Because they live it every day. It doesn't matter your background, you're living this history. You're living this reality. And so now it's in schools, and I don't want my kid to learn about residential schools and schools. I don't want her to know that, but she has to. And this is a much nicer way to start that conversation, even with something as simple as fun cereal. Like she's like picking which cereal she wants to eat. You know, she's like, oh, I want this one here. But she had representation on that cereal that was hers. It was like, yeah, there's a raven on the front. She was starting to talk about it, and it was like, that's a reality that she gets to live. That Sonny didn't. So Sonny had to make it for her. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty amazing to walk away knowing that your 4-year-old is going to have that with her. So school groups coming through, they may take nothing, and that's all right too. But I can't imagine they're going to not take something. I'm going to catch up with them later. Like I did 10 years ago when I saw Sonny's work, and finally I get to see it. It's like going back to maybe a really bad time, but also a really important time in my life. And it's the good of that time. So I think that if it's the smallest little bit, it's going to catch up. It's going to work your way in. And instead of sitting here reading this, I hope there's some fun found over there.
Yeah.
Thanks for the easy question.
So what is this actually? Is it some kind of supposed to be
burrito?
It's a burrito.
Sonny said it's a burrito. I'm pretty sure it's the Indian act.
No, it's a paper bag. He's getting a paper bag. There's a bottle of whiskey in there.
He's brown bagging it.
He's brown bagging it.
I'm just casually eating a burrito.
Oh, this is it.
Right? And the dog.
There's got to be some sort of bill of
The Bill of Not Rights.
The bill of not rights.
Okay. Oh, very nice.
Well, thanks everyone.
It's been great.
Yeah, thank you very, very much.